Starting tonight, BizAsia will bring you a special coverage of China's upcoming third plenary session of the 18th CPC Central Committee. This meeting is expected to highlight major reforms for the country going forward, and we've got all the angles covered this week and next. The third plenary session will be held in Beijing from November 9th to 12th. The focal points are China's economic reform and the central government's role in the economy. We've been hearing from the President Xi Jinping on consistent reform. Xi is urging for more market opening up, saying the gate should never be closed. Political analysts note that the top policy meeting will also explore the government playing less of a controller role in the economy. They say the market is expecting less red tape and more targeted and efficient regulations. The government is looking for ways to stabilise growth and rebalance the economic structure. Some key challenges, however, include corruption and over-investment. Now, just why is the upcoming plenary session such a big deal? Let's turn to Lily for the lowdown.
I'm going to give you a background of the plenary session and a preview of the upcoming session. The meeting is a plenary session of the CPC Central Committee, the body from which the Politburo is drawn. The Central Committee holds a number of meetings during its 5-year term where it discusses and approves big policy decisions, while other plenum deals with areas such as ideology and propaganda, and the third one usually focuses on economics. And in this meeting, the CPC's General Secretary Xi Jinping will host a meeting which will gather 376 party leaders. In China's history, the most talked about third plenum took place in December 1978, which marked the beginning of the reform and opening up policy. An important session was held in 1993, where the 13th third plenum endorsed the socialist market economy, which laid the foundation for the series of fiscal, state-owned enterprises and banking sector reforms driven through by former Premier Zhu Rongji. And also for this session, just around the corner, experts expect that major economic reform plans will be announced at the meeting. On October the 27th, the Development Research Center of the State Council released its reform proposals, which has been dubbed as the 383 project. Now, the first three actually refers to three key themes: improve the market system, transform the role of the government, and building an innovative corporate structure. And the 8 is about 8 key reform areas, and they include government, monopoly sectors, land system, financial sector, tax system, management of state assets, innovation, and also further opening up of the economy. And here is expected to be 3 areas of breakthroughs. That's the last 3 there. And that includes opening up social security reform and also land reform. Back to you, Lei.
Thanks so much, Lily, for the look ahead to the strategy setting meeting. Now, as promised, BizAsia's week-long special coverage kicks off with a look at China's efforts to improve the business environment. Our reporter Yin Hang shows us what it used to be like to start a business in China and how it will be in the future.
Well, yeah, I probably... For our first
Johann Björkesten now manages over 300 people in 5 Chinese cities. But he still can't forget the time when he had to line up outside the Bureau of Industry and Commerce to start his business 18 years ago.
I've always called China the Wild East. For business people back in the 80s and 90s, it was a virgin territory. For our first business license, it took us about 30 days to get everything in order, because you had to have a large registered capital, and you had to sort of arrange a lot of different stamps and permits and so on. And I probably spent, most of the time actually. So it was more or less a full-time job for a few weeks.
The complex paperwork and procedures had put many investors off from the Chinese market. But reforms that began in 1988 have seen the government back off from meddling in business. In that year, State Councils, ministries and commissions has reduced from 45 to 41. And after that, there have been 5 more streamline moves.
Yeah, it was easier, but at the same time the rules are clearer and tighter now. So back then it was more that you had to sort of smile and be nice, and people were good to you and nice to you. Today there are clearer rules, so you go there, you get your license, and it's the way it's supposed to be.
Chinese government has pledged to cut red tape by freeing up about 1/3 of the items that originally grasped by the government. And Premier Li Keqiang has reiterated the importance of the market as the creator of social wealth and the origin of the self-sustained economic development.
The government has also cancelled or delegated power to lower levels for 183 items previously subject to central approval.
Certainly, China has progressed a lot and has been very supportive to the business community. Well, we all, for those of us who are old enough, we obviously remember the old days when, simple things could take a long time. But now, you look at Shanghai where we are today, it's a very efficient international city. Not only is it cosmopolitan, the government has very high degree of efficiency as well. I think that's why I'm also very positive with the efficiency on the part of the Shanghai government. The free trade zone would be a success.
Transforming the role of the government in the economy will be a key part of the plenary session discussions.
The government should further streamline administration and delegate power to the lower level on various sectors so that the market can play a bigger role. And the government should turn more to post-supervisions from the current prior approval mechanisms in order to strengthen China's administrative efficiencies.
The Shanghai Free Trade Zone is another example of the government making it easier to do business in China. For business people like Johan, the only weight they should put up with is for business to come in. Yinhang CCTV, Shanghai.
For a macro perspective on the coming plenary sessions, Klaus Roland, the World Bank's country director for China, spoke to BizAsia about his expectations and the direction of the economic reforms.
Mr. Roland, thank you for joining us. Well, the third plenary session of the CPC will lay out an overall plan for the country's economic reforms. In your opinion, what will be the major direction?
Well, we believe and we support a shift from a strategy that focuses on the quantity of growth, the percentage of growth rates, to quality of growth, to make sure that growth benefits all the people of China alike. As you change, there will be winners and losers, people who benefit from the change and people who have to give up something. And to get this balance right between 2 or 3 groups will be crucial for the reform to succeed. There is no recipe, but whenever you make a decision as a leader of a country, you have to bear that in mind, that you get the balance right between the different groups in the country.
Well, the Chinese government has said the key of the reforms is to handle the relationship between the government and the market properly. In your opinion, what challenges is the country facing to reduce the administrative power in the economy and increase the role of the market?
Well, China is indeed at a critical juncture in its development process. The economy is big, and the economy is much more complicated than it used to be 30 years ago. And that really means that government cannot simply rein the economy by administrative fiat, by rules and regulations. The role of the government has to shift from a sort of actor in the economy to providing an enabling framework for the economy which is largely driven by markets. And that is what you see in many countries at this point of development. So China is not unusual to face this problem at this point in time.
And China is deepening market-oriented reforms. It is also facing increasing risks, especially in opening up its financial sector. In your opinion, how fast should the reforms be proceeded to contain the risks?
When it comes to the reforms in the financial sector and the interest rate liberalization, that probably should and could be quickened. Because it's also part of the reason why a lot of people don't save through the formal banking system but go to shadow banks where they get higher yields. So that needs to be addressed. On the other hand, on the broader reform agenda, it is fair to say that China over the last 5 years or so has lost some momentum in reforms, mainly because after the 2008 financial crisis, there was a focus on getting the economy running again, and that led to a hardening of structures that need to be reformed, need to be changed to keep China's economy competitive in the world.
The Chinese economy showed improving signs in the third quarter, but some are questioning that the government is falling back on the old path of stimulus-driven or investment-driven growth. In your opinion, is the economy on a solid footing?
I think it is on solid footing, and I haven't seen any evidence over the last few months that the re-strengthening of growth in China was due to a government stimulus package like in 2008. On the contrary, many of the political leaders in China have been on record to indicate that the quality of growth should come foremost and forefront, and to sacrifice a percentage point or less of a percent would be quite all right if the direction of quality of growth, the direction for the future of China in 10 and 20 years, would be kept in an eye and would be looked upon as the final objective of China's economic policy. The short term sometimes can be the enemy of the long-term results.
Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Let's talk more specifically about China's government function reform with our studio guest, Professor Tao Ran from the School of Economics at Renmin University, and also Acting Director at the Brookings Tsinghua Center. Welcome to our show. So, huge topic, government function reform. What are we going to see? Is it going to be across, as in horizontally across different government bodies, or is it going to be vertical and from higher to lower levels of government?
So far, we don't know yet the full plan of this session, but I think the answer is both. That China not only need to strengthen some sectors, some government regulations, for example, in foods, safety, drug safety, environmental protection, but also need to reduce the government's intervention into some sectors. For example, the state banking sector, the state, telecommunications, aviation, and health, and sometimes even health and education. This high-end service sector actually are, China's, future growth, the source of China's future growth. But I also think there's need to be a change of intergovernmental, relations, because local governments actually now have 40% of the revenue, but they're shouldering 70% of the expenditure. Either the central governments need to give up more revenue so that local governments can, make their ends meet, or the central governments need to assume some, responsibility. For example,
right now,
in terms of
pensions and healthcare are going up to the central government.
in terms of the social security, including pension that you mentioned.
Okay, so we're going to see both types of reforms, but for those areas where you mentioned where they need to give up their powers and delegate more powers, what's going to incentivize the government officials to do that? So how are we going to push through those reforms?
You are right. That's usually government don't want to reform, but under China's current situation, if there's no reform, the growth will slow down, and there's huge housing bubble and local debt problem, and also, the environment is getting worse, and corruption is getting worse. Without reform, I think China may have to face a major economic and even social crisis. I think that is, what pushed the government to start a bold reform.
So it's reform or die, and it's that pressure that's going to be the incentive.
Yes.
Thank you, and stay with us for more on this conversation. Let's now talk about the role of government in the economy. What is the government supposed to and not supposed to do? Our reporter Feng Xin sat down with Zhou Wenzhong, the former Chinese ambassador to the US and now Secretary General of the Boao Forum for Asia. Feng Xin began by asking how he sees the role of the government in the Chinese economy.
In any economy, I think the government is supposed to regulate, to supervise, to plan for the economy of the country. But in China, what we have is a socialist market economy. And of course, we have a very big public sector. So naturally, the government is very much involved in the performance of the economy.
Well, in your opinion, in our economy, where does our government do too little and where does it do too much?
There are areas where the private sector is not allowed to perform a role at the moment. On the other hand, I hope the government will gradually decrease its sort of a role in micromanaging the economy. So I think that's the consensus, it seems to me.
Earlier this year, we saw the State Council removed more than 100 of its approval authorities. And so how would you assess the completion of this reform so far?
I think this is very necessary because what we have is a market economy, is a market-oriented socialist economy. In other words, even in the public sector, things many changes have taken place even in the public sector. The companies in the public sector are public companies. They are listed in different stock markets. Government is only one of the shareholders, maybe the largest shareholders. So that is to say they should leave the management to the management of the company. Yeah. So if that is the case, in other words, the government doesn't need to approve some of the items which still need to be approved by the government will no longer need to be approved, because it will be the decision of the company itself, because they will know whether this is the right thing to do for the company.
Right, and in our economy, a lot of key industries such as energy and telecommunications are state-owned. And so how should the government strike a balance between developing these key industries and facilitating market competition at the same time?
I think what we'll see is a gradual loosening of monopoly. That is to say, private sector will be allowed to move into all these areas.
Well, but sometimes we see that the goals of development for the central government and local governments are not quite the same. For example, well, the central government tries to or hopes to keep our economic growth at a relatively stable level. Local governments are often very keen on investing in big projects, and therefore they've accumulated heavy debts, which is becoming an increasing issue for the Chinese government. So in your opinion, how can the central government and local governments tackle this issue?
I think the statistics show that now we have about 19 trillion in total, so-called local debt, or debt owned by local authorities. And this is quite a big number. I think there are no other ways. One way, as I see it, is that local authorities will need to try to increase revenue. And secondly, they need to reduce their expenditure. The basic principle, as far as the economy is concerned, they need to live within their means.
Let's get more analysis on this topic and get back to Professor Tao Ran from the School of Economics at Renmin University. So we heard there about what the government's role in the economy should be. It's a hard balance, right? Too much meddling and you stifle innovation, entrepreneurship, and then not enough, and then risks grow. What ideally should be the balance be?
In principle, the government, need to get out of most of the business. Even including the business that the Chinese SOE is still, getting in. On the other hand, the government is responsible for environmental protection, food and drug, safety, and redistribute income from the rich to the poor. I think, the modern economics tells us, actually the government's role is in industries should become smaller and smaller, but for regulation, on public security, food and drug, safety and income redistribution actually should become bigger. I don't think actually there's any contradict, here, but just mentioning this principle actually does not really help. You can always say strengthen the regulatory body, to so that you hire more people. But that does not mean that you end up with better results. For example, the Chinese government give a lot of transfers to the poor, provinces. But most of the money actually was not used very effectively in poverty alleviation. So why not spend the money, in more developed area where, the cities can take care of the more migrants and the children? That's actually a very effective way of, getting these poor people out of poverty.
So what other institutional changes, changes to the system should be put in place to make sure that this happens? We've got the state assets regulators, we've got all these vested interests, these very powerful bodies. So given that, how do you actually reduce the role of the government?
Yeah, that's very difficult, given that there are very strong interest groups. For example, the SASAC you just mentioned, actually, if their goal is to maximize the state's assets value, that means, in this sector.
That means more monopolies.
Yeah, make monopolies and they crowd out private business. I think that goal has to be changed. On the other hand, the government also need to, strengthen its regulatory bodies on environment, food and drug safety.
But they're traditionally the weaker
weaker
organs.
one. So how to make them stronger? I think you need to find some, mechanism to make them more accountable to the people. So you have to have some accountability from the bottom, so that their roles can be strengthened. But but actually, streamlining government bodies actually I think is not the whole story. I mean, at current state, China actually needs some smart reform. It's not a reform that you want to break through in all areas. I want to give you one example. For example, now, given that local government and the state-owned enterprise already owed a lot of debt and they have made very bad investments, liberalizing the financial sector actually may be very risky. Because. Okay.
Thank you so much for that. We'd love to continue the discussion, but that's all we have time for right now.
Okay.